Hello, people. Welcome back, or welcome me back. So we talked, this is the third workshop. First workshop, we talked about ideas, brainstorming, coming up with ideas for a film. Second production workshop, we talked about shooting your footage. I have brought in my expert. This is Kate Purdie, who is my wife, who is a really great editor. She worked at 60 Minutes for many years and worked on a lot of great documentary projects. And she's going to talk about, now you have your footage, what do you do with it?
And that's it, okay. Well, I mean, you've all started making storyboards, I hear, right? And thinking about what your footage could say, how the interviews that you had, did you log them or listen to them and write down a bit of what people had said and how you could put that together? So you have to think about a couple of different things. First, what the audience knows at a particular time, how much time you spend with each person, how to edit it down so that it connects together, how to make connections between footage that you have. Are you using footage that's sort of from the internet or that sort of thing, or are you shooting people doing solar panels or that kind of thing? A little bit of both. Okay, all right. So structure is really the question. Structure and time and rhythm. So when you're editing, you want to sort of always keep looking at what you're doing, even as you're putting it together as a rough cut. Take a look at it, see how it flows, see if you can make connections between things. One handy thing about making a storyboard on a write erase board, or I often use Post-its, because then there's actually connections that can be made all over the place, right? And so then you can say, oh, wait, this person's talking about this, and that would make a good connection to put these two things together. There's a couple of things I'm going to show today. One is I worked on the Vermont Movie and edited together a bit of the footage from Hurricane Irene. All of you remember that? So that was all YouTube footage, and I put it together and used it. It's now being used with a bunch of different people doing interviews over it. So that's the kind of thing a lot of you might be doing, is putting together your interviews and having them relate to different imagery. So we'll look at that. Then I want to show, after that, I teach at Bennington College, and a documentary that a student made that she had no idea how to structure, and she kept trying to do it chronologically and had a great deal of difficulty, and then ended up finding a way to have the audience sort of hook into what was happening to this massive climate change march that she had shot with, I think, 3 GoPros. Do you know what GoPros are? On heads, and a Rebel camera, which is just a DSLR camera, and they just had tons of footage, but she didn't have a story. So finding the story is really the question. So why don't we show a little bit of the Irene footage.
Got quite a bit of rain this morning. Hey, sweetie. This is the hurricane.
When the hurricane happened, it was a very busy day here in the forecast lab. I was the only person on, and handling a lot of information and trying to get it out to the public as quickly as possible. So if you'd watched very closely, you probably would have seen a little wisps of steam rising from my ears or something like that, as I tried to get all the work done in a timely fashion. Hurricane Irene is churning north-northeast at about 15 miles per hour and bringing torrential rain along the spine of the Green and White Mountains. Flooding of every major river in Vermont will occur.
We lost everything. We lost all of it. So.
All the washouts aren't hampering cleanup efforts.
So what you have is, I got to watch all of the YouTube footage from that day that was collected. I think it must have been, 100 clips from BCTV, from, the Barton covered bridge going up. Unbelievable footage. And within that, there were various pieces of audio of the time. So you have that moment in time when people are saying, oh my gosh, or whatever else they were saying there. And, or reporting live from Flat Street, or, the sounds of the crashing waves as they were. And then you have, at another point in time, an interview with the meteorologist, eye in the sky, and he's talking about that day. So that is informing how you look at that footage, the fact that we didn't know quite what it was going to be. He was the only one on, so just thinking about what his day was like makes the footage different, makes him, what he's saying, more poignant by looking at how extreme things were. So that's the kind of thing you want to think about when you're structuring stuff. What is the picture saying? What is the audio saying? And sometimes they're of the same thing, and sometimes they're connecting in different ways. And then also it's sort of weaving in and out of the time, the period of time when it was happening, and the looking back, the family that lost everything. They're talking about it probably the next day or the day after. Later on in the piece, we actually also interviewed Steve West at another time, and he talked a lot about the repair of the Brattleboro food farmers market. And so we had that footage also from BCTV of how people had gotten together so quickly to bring it back together, as he's just talking about the spirit of the community and how they all came together. So thinking about what your interviews say and what your footage says, and trying to combine them in different ways so that it's both coherent and compels the audience, brings them from one place to another to have maybe deeper understanding or more information. So that's an interesting thing to think about when you are making your storyboards. Any questions? Okay, does anyone have any questions about this particular piece or anything related to your own work that you wanted to talk about? No? Okay. The next piece I'm going to show is it's about 10 minutes, and a student went down to the climate march. She has some of the things that you may have in your footage. Not great sound, bad color correction, some of which she could have fixed because we have maybe a little more sophisticated edit system, but she ran out of time. So it took her all semester to figure out how to structure this because the march was in September. So let's take a look at it. She just had, footage and footage and footage. And first of all, she was like, well, what is this about? Is this just about the march, which every news report was also covering, and in a better way? Is this about, what she finally decided to do was to make it about how a small school can be involved in something of this size, but it still didn't have an audience connection. And so someone suggested that she create connections with individuals who were there and follow them. Then she did some other interviews later with them about the march and about their participation in climate change events. So she was able to use some of that but about when the march was happening, and some of it about what's happening in the future. So again, that past, present, but all sort of trying to make a conceptual idea come across.
I say climate, you say action! Climate! Action! Action! I say people, you say march!
On September 21st, 44 students from Bennington College joined the 400,000 people marching in support of direct action addressing global climate change. It was mad awesome, so inspiring. But let's backtrack a little. This is Forrest. She started the Environmental Action Group on campus a couple years ago, and this group thrives on trying to figure out how us students can do tangible things to help the environment while we're at college. This is Bennington College. It's a very small liberal arts college in the middle of Vermont, renowned for progressive, self-driven education. That's where we are.
Action!
This is John Lawson. He went to the climate march with us. You'll see more of him later. This is David Bond, our Keystone XL pipeline course teacher. Yes, we have a class right now on the Keystone XL pipeline.
In which the government agencies, which are supposed to represent the public and be transparent to the public, are increasingly preparing for eventual court battles.
This is Allison Dennis. She's super awesome, teaches leadership and business. You'll see more of her later too. This is me. I helped get us to the march. I also do video work, so I decided to bring some cameras along the way with us. This is our story.
I'm blown away. I'm inspired on a daily basis by the critical mass of students on campus who are not only deeply care about the environment, but who, through their daily actions, are practically making a difference on this campus in Vermont and more broadly.
Generally, the Environmental Action Group has been doing a lot more since after going to the climate march. It's an amazing thing.
I think that was a really inspirational thing to continue our work in these smaller scale environments. It's something to really remember when we get back to Vermont or our specific homes, that there are really, we're not alone in this as much as it may seem.
I just don't think there's doubt anymore that deep environmental concern and caring is mainstream. 400,000 people is a lot of people to all show up in the same place at the same time.
Ultimately, marching for significant action on climate change together was just so heartening.
The amount of support that existed there that day was perhaps more powerful than most things that you get to see in your life.
So, a couple of things about this piece. At one point, one thing to think about is whether you need to have chronology or not. Obviously, in the Irene footage, chronology is very important. You have to understand, what was happening on that day, what happened the next day, even though you're bringing in narration or comments about that day from other times. In this march, she had to sort of free herself from this idea of chronology. As it happens, the moment of silence came earlier on in the march, and she had that early on in the piece, and she had someone talking about it over, about how incredible it was. And I said, well, actually, it's incredible without having someone say that it's incredible. You can just let it be incredible, right? So thinking about those kinds of things, when can the footage talk without words or with words, either way?
Just let me jump in. I mean, I found that moment of silence really moving, and the fact that it was at the end, it was sort of a way to kind of metaphorically sum up the power of this event. And if it had been earlier, I don't think it would have really had that effect. It wouldn't have had that kind of summing up of the significance.
Well, and particularly you've just heard from people talking about how it had changed the group that went down there, the group that was starting to work on environmental ideas at the college, that had gone from 6 to now about 50 students in a college of 600. So that the changes then were sort of represented by the power of that moment. So looking for almost metaphorical relationships is also something you can do, in addition to if you're talking about someone who's putting up solar panels, you might have them talk, and then you see them putting things up. A couple of the critiques of this, I don't know if any of you have yellow footage. Anybody have any of their footage completely yellow? Well, that's just, I don't know if you notice, a number of the interviews are completely yellow cast. That's typical Bennington lighting. I don't know why. Low energy, who knows? But
There's also a lack of white balance.
a lack of white balance in the beginning, and probably not enough light also. So she was just thinking about getting the interview, not what it was going to look like. So that was last class, right? Last workshop. But it's still something to think about. But then you also decide, oh, this is important. I'm going to use it. You know, it's not the end of the world. Let me remember to tell you the most important thing that I tell my students always is to never think about this pile of footage as something to boil down. What you're going to do is do an additive process instead of subtractive. So you're going to look through your footage and say, what do I want? As opposed to saying, oh, I've got this hour-long interview, you know, how do I cut it down? And that will help you. You know, I don't know how much footage you have, but if you have a lot of footage, it can be overwhelming. And so just to look for, what is it that I want to say? And that can be in the footage, in the visuals, or it can be in the audio, the narration or the interview, okay? And it will change depending on what you're trying to say. In this case, Erica started with the march because she was just so, and this is another interesting thing, she was so attached to the march and how incredible it was. And then she needed to have people talking, and she needed to get in there with her arrows and her voiceover to set it up, to frame it. And then you could let more of the footage go, right? And just play on its own, because you've heard that people have gone there. You know what's happening. But if you just start showing it, it just looks like chaos. You don't even know necessarily what it is, right? Unless she could have maybe used a news report or something like that. But she chose to make it a personal piece about her group going there. So she used her voice and did that little, let's go back. But she did want to start with the march, and she did, just to pull you in, get the audience interested. I mean, if you just start with someone talking, it's less appealing. The same is true with the Irene. Now that's a section of a bigger movie, but it starts with just this, rain coming down, and then the little kid out playing in the puddles as if, it's just a rainy day, and then the puddles get bigger and the water gets deeper. And so that footage is saying something on its own. And then the interview with Eye in the Sky, comes in and out and sort of frames it. So it's a combination, always. And each one of you may begin in a different way. And starting at the end or ending at the beginning is sometimes an appropriate thing to do as well. For example, we did a piece for Habitat for Humanity, and they built houses for people. And we actually started it at the house warming for the house, and then went back to see all the people who came and were involved with it. And that was sort of how we introduced the subject. I don't know, can anyone tell me what you're filming, what your story is about?
Well, the overlying concept is community resilience, really, and related to environmentalism. So we're all doing topics encompassing that. My film is about solid waste management. So I talked to Wyndham Solid Waste and talking about new laws coming into play and what future plans might be.
And what do you tell her what you're starting with too, because I think it's a good approach.
Yeah, that's good. So a couple weeks ago we did a trash audit here because we're instating a composting program. So I'm going to start with footage of that.
Excellent, excellent. I was going to say you should start with trash, because that we've actually filmed. We did some things for Wyndham Solid Waste, and one was a school trip, and they have incredible piles of things there. So that's just the thing of bring them into the tent, get the audience interested, and so using what you're doing here with composting or trash is definitely great, and it's action, and it's you want to know about it, and that's another thing. You don't always have to. You want things to be coherent, but you don't want to have it pedantic, let's say. So you might let them not know exactly what's happening for a minute or two, and then come in and say, we're working on this project, and someone maybe talk about the amount of trash that goes through the school or something, whatever kind of more interview or narrative kind of piece that you want. And so each of you can look at your project and think of what is interesting about it. Are you guys up for a little more movie watching? So we filmed them. We started out filming them for the Vermont Movie because we chose to do a project on Vermont agriculture, and we live 10 minutes away from them, and Andy's family and they've known each other for probably 30, something like that. So we knew Stu, who's the father, and then the kids who are now grown-ups and have kids of their own. And so we thought, interesting, because they had been a conventional dairy farm and have become organic. And so I thought that was a little model. And so this is another one of those things where you're taking a small thing, a small farm, and trying to make something that will just reflect a lot of what's happening in agriculture in Vermont. So we did a lot of shooting for the Vermont Movie, and then we ended up making a film because we shot them over 3 years. So this is the beginning, and we started, the first shoot we did was at 5 in the morning of Ross going out to milk the cows. And the music's by Tyler Gibbons. He's always also one. He's an alum. Maybe he'll. Yeah.
So for this mix, if anything doesn't come through, just cut a little of it and then fill it with Lola. Okay. Yeah, sometimes it can just be like.
So you don't necessarily know what's going on. You just know it's a farm. It's early in the morning. They're just doing their work. Nothing really. More informative than the pictures.
Come on, Eva.
So I was able to cut from outside to inside the hen house. You just feel free to cut when you need to. So this is essentially a montage of different times of year, different activities that happen on the farm. I think she's in high school now. So having like a little musical montage also can depend on what the scale of your film is. You might just have a minute or something like that if it's a 3-4 minute piece. Okay, pause a minute. So I'm using, you know, the pictures to illustrate. I'm also sort of pacing it so it's not, you know, talk, 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 talk. Sometimes there's a little sound of something just to give you a breather and to appreciate the picture. And then a very common thing that's sort of useful is when you're moving to a different location is to have the sound come up at the exterior. So, you know, we're in the greenhouse, and so she starts talking while we're in the greenhouse, while we're outside.
How about I bring it over and see if, I want to see if you can line it up.
So you're leading you're leading people into the scene, and it makes that cut, the transition, a little smoother. In essence, one way to think about editing is that you're word processing with pictures and with audio, where you can take bits and move it around the same way you would take words in a Word document and move it around. And you can separate the picture from the sound and move one to one place, and you know, not even use the other. You can use audio without picture. You can use picture without the audio. So you know, that's what you're going to want to be doing. Is in this case, Kate took the footage of the outside of the greenhouse and just had the audio from the next scene begin over that picture.
Can I use the whiteboard a minute? You can have a timeline and say, for example, Ross's interview, you know, there was his picture and sound were together, say.
So the top rectangle
So this
picture.
is Ross, pic, and sound. And they're in sync, right? That's how you shoot it, right? And then I might put a shot over it of a field. That's just sort of a simple thing. And actually, as it happened, Ross started talking over, there were cows, and there was the sound of cows and, you know, spring sound. And there might have been music too, I think, at that point. The tail end of music.
So here's cows.
I think it's a lot easier to be a farmer in Vermont than it is.
Just that kind of thing
hear
then
him.
pulls you to the next thing. And then the same thing with Amanda, you know, and her and son, interior, right? Interior. And then there were other things in between, but then I put a shot of the outside greenhouse. And this has a lot of editing in it.
And then I met a Vermont farmer, go figure. We kind of dream together. Ross often will catalyze a project, and then I'll kind of do some of the maintenance on it. But he's the one who's always like seeking an innovation and like a tool for a special project or a new tractor, a new implement, or you know, various things like that. Romaine, Butterhead, and then it switches to beats.
You know, you can go, feel free to go from one thing to another as you need, and worry about it later. Like, make the cuts you want.